Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Yuri Flagrare, did I say that right? About what is narrative design and how do you design your future in games.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Welcome to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy, and joining me today is Yuri Flagrare. Yuri is a narrative designer and a software engineer in the industry and has actually been here through IGA a couple of times. It's wonderful to have you on the show. I'm excited to talk narrative design with you. How are you doing today, Yuri? What are you having for lunch?
Yeah, the honor is mine. I'm not having anything because it is 2 p.m. for me in Brazil right now, but I had pasta and meatballs, I guess. So that's it. Right now, I'm not having anything.
Yeah. Nice, good and hearty. You're carbo loading, doing like a marathon tomorrow?
Not really, but I should have done CrossFit competition last week, but I couldn't. Ooh. So I'm trying to do it next week. So.
Hey, that's good. Let's switch. Let's flip the stereotype. Game developers are jacked and super in shape now. Forever on. All right, everyone, take care of your bodies. All right. Well, welcome to the show, Yuri. It's really great to have you
Thanks.
on. Rick says we really are. Confirmed. You heard it here first. It's really great to have you on the show. It's always good to sit down and talk with people from all different walks of life, and narrative design is definitely one of the healthiest bodies of this community. There's so many people here who want to do game design, and then I would say secondarily, there's so many people who want to write and tell stories through the power, the medium of games. Before we actually dive into that and get deep, of course we got to start with our typical question on the show, which is the origin story. So, Yuri, would you tell us where you are today and how you got there?
Yeah, so a little bit of introduction of myself. I'm from Brazil. I'm 32. And right now I'm working as a software engineer in a company that makes educational products for children, but gamified. So as a software engineer, I design everything like the front end, the back end, all of the stuff to make the learning not only easy, but also fun. So yeah, I'm not the person who actually designs I would say the game aspects of the things, but I program the game aspects of things. I set up animations, all of this stuff. So yeah. And as a narrative designer, I have been doing work for a small company called Froglet Games for 1 year. We decided to split up last month. So right now I'm not really doing anything on narrative design, but I'm looking for... Yeah, yeah, it happens, I guess. Sometimes you need to decide when things are not really aligned with your goals. And I think a lot of the talk today is about that. So, yeah.
That's honestly, it's a really good talk. It is definitely an interesting and evolving landscape in the game industry. One of the things that is absolutely on the rise is revenue share or volunteer projects. And that, I think, for the most part is a good thing. Obviously, we all want to get paid for our work. But for instance, when I was getting started, even that didn't really exist. So the way that you got started in games was mostly you built things yourself, and maybe you'd find a friend or two. But it was very much solo projects. And that's fine. That's kind of how we all learned, or how many of us learned. But these days, there's so much more support. Yeah, there's so much more support for putting juniors together to build things together. And that's great. But it is also okay when you find out that that's not quite right.
Yes.
That it's time to move on. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. So good on you for having the courage to move on.
Thanks.
Well, awesome. Absolutely. So we are here to talk about narrative design, and specifically in the second half of the title here, how you design your future in games. So I'm kind of fascinated with this. Can you give us the 101 to the topic for today?
Yeah, let's say that we can... Actually, the original title was how you can narrative design your career in games. So I'm trying to make this whole thing one thing. So bear with me. So when I was just starting on trying to get into games, I really knew that I loved writing and stories. but I didn't know that I had this background on engineering and programming and this analytical brain. So I was wondering, how can I find something where I can leverage the thing I know how to do and the thing I would like to be doing? So after a lot of research, I found something very curious that I have never seen before, which was narrative design. And honestly, is one of the hardest careers to understand on games in general. At least it was for me. It took me a lot of time to understand because it's so abstract. Even game design sometimes is hard. I really love the door, I don't know, the door thing that people talk about. Oh, if you have a door in the game, what the door does, and all of this stuff to explain what is game design. And
Mm-hmm.
it is really interesting that narrative design is a thing that is a mixture between game design, at least for me, game design and writing. So what you want to do is, and I would say that every good narrative designer is a good game designer and also a good writer. I cannot
Mm-hmm.
see a person doing just one of those things well. You really need to
Mm-hmm.
understand both things. But a really good example for that is one of my favorite games is Hades, and Hades has one of the most brilliant forms of narrative design. I know that a lot of people really love it, but I don't know if people really put some thought on this. So just one quick example on Hades. Roguelikes are very known for you having to repeat the same thing over and over again. Like you die, you try again, you die, you try again until you
Mm-hmm.
finally finish the game. And you probably have those power ups. If it is a roguelite, it might be a little bit different. But the concept is the same. You really try your best to beat the game a lot of times. You're probably going to die a lot of times. And that's the game design, like the concept of the game, the core game loop of the thing. It was probably not the narrative design who came up with the idea, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Most games start as a game mechanic or something. Where the narrative design comes is, what is the meaning of this? I like to say that narrative design is giving meaning to mechanics or game design. So in this situation, what I like about Hades is it makes a lot of sense for who is playing, that every time you're trying to get out of hell, like I know the name is different, but let's call it just hell. The place is totally different because in the story is a labyrinth. So you understand why the game mechanic is the way it is and why every time you die you are revived because you're a demigod or a god, I don't know. You cannot die. So that's why every time you are revived. So like I said, it is a way to give an explanation that is plausible to the things that happen on the game design. And honestly, it is what excites me about playing games. Sometimes they're very so well connected that you cannot see the split between them. So, like they seem to be just one thing. So there's a lot of other things on Hades. If you have not played Hades, I really recommend because it is a very good game to study on a lot of different things. Another example is the booms, like the power-ups you have. You could just have power-ups, but the way they insert power-ups in the game is a very narrative driven. Like, okay, the gods are helping you get out of hell and they are giving you power-ups. So it makes sense again. It's just not random. So yeah, that's one-on-one of what is narrative design for me.
Yeah.
And
I love
yeah, go ahead.
I'll jump in for a moment, and then we can keep going
Yeah.
down the designing the future path. Narrative design, I think, is like you said, it's sort of an emerging field. Game development at large. I'll say this again because I think it's important for everybody to hear many times. Game development at large is a budding field, is still very new, very young. So a lot of what we do here is like just happening. So narrative design, for instance, is really only a couple of years old, maybe a decade old, at least as like a well-recognized job title. And like many roles that we're starting to get these days, it is a hybrid role, and it is largely somewhere between a writer and a game designer. So I actually love the simple definition, giving meaning to mechanics and game design. I was just one of my favorite things to do, and this is something I recommend for all of you, regardless of what your discipline is and regardless of what you do in games, is to talk through design challenges in various games that other people are working on. So surround yourself with other developers and just get into like nitty gritty conversations with them about what they're working on. My older brother is a game developer as well, and he's working on this very simple idle game where you have like a kingdom that you are slowly building up over time. And there's a really simple mechanic where there are weapon equipables. So I can put like a sword on one of my little guys who goes around my kingdom. And then there's also equipment equipables. So like I can have a better pickaxe on my guy so that he can mine faster. And we had a whole long conversation about how you explain that to the player. And how they mechanically should function, because you'll never want your miners to not have a pickaxe. But there may be times where you want a different weapon for your guy, depending on sort of the situation. So, and yet the concept of like, I have to equip a sword, but the pickaxe just happens automatically is kind of weird. So we were talking through exactly what you're describing, the narrative explanation for why that might be the case. And what we eventually settled on was we shouldn't use pickaxes. We should instead have some kind of upgrade system. They're two completely separate things. They're two completely different parts of the story. I also, do you know Brandon Sanderson?
Oh yeah, it's like my top one mentors.
Easy, yeah, right.
Yeah.
If y'all haven't read Brandon Sanderson, especially if you want to work in narrative at all, read Brandon Sanderson. My God. So he's really most well known for creating interesting and fascinating magic systems for different worlds. And then he's kind of doing this weird MCU thing where all of his worlds are actually a part of one universe, and so all these different magic systems intertwine, which is really cool. But what you're describing, I think, is a great example. Like Brandon Sanderson's actual sort of high fantasy storytelling is good, but not, I wouldn't say exceptional. What I think is actually exceptional is that he has an answer to every question. His world is incredibly well thought out. His magic systems are very specific, and they start extremely mysterious every time. And they really feel like magic. And eventually, by the end, you're like, oh, I know all the rules about how this system works and why all these things happened. And I think that is a perfect example of giving meaning to mechanics.
Yeah, totally. I actually is a coincidence because like 2 weeks ago, I was for the second time watching his courses on YouTube. Like he has a whole course on writing. I highly recommend for anyone who wants to get into writing prose or books or even writing for games. It gives you a lot of understanding of narrative structure and so on. And yeah, I had this feeling when I was watching again, now that I have this game knowledge that I didn't have before. This guy is doing game mechanics all of the time on his books, and it is awesome.
There's one day we'll see this, like not that far from now. We'll see some really sweet games in the Sandiverse.
Totally.
Yeah. All right, so I interrupted you because I wanted to spend a second talking about narrative. Oh, I keep forgetting to say this. For those who are listening, just so you know, this is the last episode of the year. So you will see 2 skipped weeks as we all take a holiday break. We love you. We'll be back in the new year, and we'll get back into the Indie Game Lunch Hour. All right, but I interrupted you. You were going to jump into the second half of the title for today. So tell us a little bit about narrativing your future.
Yeah, so my premise on life when trying to get something is always to like reverse engineer my objective or my goal, like where I want to be. And when I do that, what I'm actually doing is giving meaning to a narrative I'm going to construct to get there. So that's how my brain operates. So let's say I want to get into games. What I'm doing is actually, okay, be specific. What do you want to do? You want to be like a solo developer. You want to work for a company. It is a like indie company. It is like a AA, a AAA. What is the role you would like to fill? Because all of those questions would set the goal. And then for you to have like a narrative arc, I would say like a character arc to get there, you have to have like a lot of stuff in the middle that will fulfill all of the boxes that will help you get there. It's not a promise, like you cannot promise to get there, but you can promise to make the things to get there. So I want to dive a little bit on this concept using something that happened in the past for me as an example. So when I just started writing, like writing prose, I was not very good. mainly because I was just doing the same thing everyone was doing. I didn't really have a lot of expertise on structure, on techniques, and also like the books I had as references were the same ones as everyone has, like Lord of the Rings, Narnia, Harry Potter, all of this stuff. So I was, in a sense, doing the same thing. So I tried to get into a writing program with a very famous horror author of Brazil. He's very known here, but he's not really huge. Like, doesn't sell a lot of books, but at least like 1 million books easily. Each book he writes sells. So he had like this very interesting concept of agencying other writers and helping them become indie, I would say. So I tried to get in the program, and one of the things was you had to write a really short story about a thing that he, like, it was a specific briefing. It was a sci-fi story, and I had to write within those constrictions, I would say. So I failed miserably. Like, it was terrible. They had like different phases, and I didn't even get to the next phase, and I felt really bad about it. And it took me a while. I felt really sad for weeks, I would say, because I was really trying to get out of like my daily job, start this thing as a professional writer. It was like 10 years ago or something. Mm-hmm. And after a while, I figured I want to know what I did wrong and why I didn't even go to the next phase. What was the thing that I did wrong that could be improved? It took me a really long time to reach out to the person who was actually accepted and ask them for the actual thing that they have written, and for me to read the thing, to understand, okay, this is a thing that is acceptable and is good, and you are now going to compare it to the thing you've done and see the difference and what you can improve. And it came down to execution, because the idea was pretty much the same. We told the same story, basically. It was a little bit different, but it was the same concept. But the execution was a lot more sophisticated, interesting, and so on. What happened that day was this guy became my best friend, and we started to talk about books and stuff. And one of the things that I knew that I was doing wrong was I was really bad at writing like the first paragraph of things. I wasn't hooking people. Like, they would just leave in the first paragraph. They'd say, oh, this is not interesting. I don't want to read the rest of this thing. There's nothing here for me. So I took that to my heart and thought, okay, I need to get better at writing first paragraphs. How can I do that? Just a few weeks after this, I came to understand about a concept called short fiction, short flash fiction, which is like really, really small stories, about 140 characters, 200 words maximum, this kind of stuff, which is really, really hard because you don't have a lot of space to tell a story when doing that. So what I did on that time was, okay, I want to be really good at telling stories and hooking people. And if I have just a little bit of space to tell a story, I need to be really good at hooking people, because I just have like 3 sentences or sometimes a whole paragraph or 2, something like that, but it's really short. So what I did was I came up with a plan to every single day write a short fiction flash story until I felt like, okay, I'm good now. The original idea was one year, like 365. And when I reached something like 320, I kind of burned out, so I had to stop a little bit. And then I came back again and wrote like 100. So in the end, it was like 444, which is a cool number. It wasn't on purpose, but it's a cool number.
Good narrative.
Yeah. So in the end, I like to think that I became very good because I tried again to get into the program of this writer, and I got in. Like, it was a totally different way of writing. I knew I had a different style because I was reading other books. It was 2 years after the original thing. So I was and that's the word for me that is very definitive on trying to get something done. You need to be intentional on the things you're doing. Like, things need to have purpose. In my case, I was trying to fix something that I was very bad at. So I like to think it worked because in the end I had success. It's not what always happens, but I put the effort. And that's something I do on everything. I think that's the best illustration. But what I'm trying to say here is, if you want to be, for example, a narrative designer or a game designer, or whatever the thing is, you like to say, just make games. And I would say, just make games. Yeah, for sure. But be intentional with what you want to do with the games you're trying to create. I don't know. If you're trying to create a portfolio base for narrative design, focus heavily on story or things that you can do. If you're not good at programming, if you're not good at art, try to do just interactive fiction. You have Twine, you have Inky, you have a lot of options, Bitsy, a lot of good places to go. But if you have more abilities, then try to be intentional. Okay, I want to be very good at branching narrative. I want to be very good at emerging narrative. I want to produce these pieces of portfolio. Because when you have this kind of plan, you come up with systems, and those systems will keep you going forward. Like, okay, every week I'll try to get something done to improve my goal, and so on. And I think the final idea is, if anyone is interested on this, there is a very good book on this idea, which is called Ultra Learning. It's very good. It's about learning something with purpose very fast so you can be very good at something. But if you are trying to do this kind of thing, one great tip I have is find people that are already in the place you want to be, and find the things they have done that you have not, or that you could do that to have like the same experience. Of course, doing alone is hard, but it's crucial for you to do and to ask for feedback from people. Doesn't need to be experts. It could be other people trying to get there as you are, but yeah, it helps a lot.
Oh, this is awesome. So something on this show that is a skill that I practice is when to take over the conversation, when to let people talk. And when I let people talk is when they have something awesome to say. And that was a really awesome piece of learning for everybody in this room and everybody listening to this podcast. I want to call out a couple of things that I think are really strong about what you just described. The very first one that I find pivotally important to anybody who really gets anywhere is the ability to fail and the ability to be bad at something first. The first step to ever being any kind of competent at any skill is being bad first. And being bad feels bad. It doesn't feel good to get rejected from this program that matters to you and that you had your heart set upon. But the fact that you were rejected from this program and, you took a second to be human and go, damn, that sucks. But then after that moment, you went, all right, how can I learn and how can I make sure that I am still gaining from this experience? That is something that everybody in this room will only help you become so much better. I also love the be intentional with what you're doing. It's almost, we made those jokes about working out at the beginning of this episode. It's almost like doing your reps. I really like the concept of you writing your 200-word stories once a day, every day for 440 days, 444, I should say. That is, take any skill and do it even for an hour for 444 days straight, and you'll probably be pretty good at that skill. And then the fact that you went looking for, I would hope so, yeah. And the fact that you went looking for mentors and those to learn from and gain feedback from is also, I think, pivotally important. So that this framework and sort of formula that you're describing to become more competent at narrative, I think everybody in this room can use and can apply to whatever your discipline is and whatever skill you are trying to practice. I think if you can sort of, this message that I use all the time, just make games, I am also in favor of breaking down the rep to be as small as possible. What is the completable project that I can gain feedback from and move on from? And what you figured out for narrative is, 200 words is pretty small, but it's still a complete, discrete project. And so if you can do something similar for your own discipline, your own field, that's only going to help too, because you can get more reps in more quickly.
Yes, totally.
Awesome. Yeah, so I feel like you also you started to allude to almost making the journey, like the act of practicing, the act of repping, a narrative into and of itself. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you would describe as true?
Yes. So is something. There's even like a therapy line of work which is called narrative therapy. If everyone is interested, you guys can research a little bit, which is telling yourself stories of the life you want to have. Like I'm not a psychologist by any means. I'm just saying that that's a thing that people actually do to try to shift the way they see the world. So as another example, I can probably say doing CrossFit is very hard. Like, it's very, very hard. And when I started on CrossFit, I was terrible because I'm not a person that's naturally like a athlete or something. I didn't have like this background. And people would laugh at me all the time. One of the coaches, when he left the gym I work out, said to me, "I thought you were going to quit in this first week because you were terrible, and now I'm not good by any means. I'm just experienced. I know how to do any techniques you ask me." So yeah, but because I I said something to my wife this week that was the same thing I said to myself. I am not going to lose to this kind of thing. I'm going to overcome this. I don't care how. And I said something similar in the last few days. So that's something I always tell myself. I can't win this narrative. I can't get there. I don't know how. I'll come up with a plan. So when you try to do that, you become like a character. Because one of the things that happened to me in the past was I was stuck in a job for 10 years that I hated. I was a support IT guy. Like, okay, your print is on fire. I was the guy to put out the fire. So that's the thing. And I hated my job and hated my graduation. But I felt like I was.
That sounds so much fun.
Yeah, if it got fired, yeah, but it was something very dumb, like it's just not plugged on the energy or something.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I was feeling like I was living a life that was not mine. I was feeling like I was not a protagonist of my own life. I was feeling like things were happening to me instead of I was doing work to get where I wanted. So that shift of I don't know, of view of the world make totally difference to me. And I think the biggest way to do that is stop caring about the results and start caring about the journey. And I know that sounds cliche, and it is cliche, but the thing is, when you start enjoying the evolution you're getting from things, you are paying attention to the narrative arc you have, like as a character, the things you're learning. Like there is this genre of literature which is called literature RPG. I don't know if you guys are knowledgeable of this thing, but it's basically you bring like game mechanics to books. So your character has a status window, it levels up, all of this stuff in the story. So is a genre. It's probably more a stylistic style than a genre, but whatever. And it is very good for me because when I do like things for me, I really, for example, I'm trying to increase the number of reps I do in a specific exercise on the gym. So I come up with a plan. Okay, I want to increase what I can do to increase. I'm not trying to get the best execution or the most load of the gym that anyone can carry. I'm just trying to get better. So I come up with plans and things I find fun to do. That's an important thing. When you come up with a plan that is fun to do, you're going to get there every day, and you stop caring about the result because you know it's going to happen at some point because you're doing the reps, you're doing the things.
Yeah, I love that. This is one that I can relate to so deeply, and one that I can suggest to every single listener in this room. Y'all are a bunch of game developers. You're listening to a podcast about game dev origin stories. That means that probably you're a bit of a dork, bit of a nerd. We love you very much for it. And I can tell you, I am a dork and I am a nerd. And one of the things that absolutely unlocked me is, number one, letting go of any kind of inhibitions about being a dork and a nerd. I'm sure many of you have experienced the same thing. For so long through school, I felt like that was bad and I had to change and I wasn't quite right. Letting go of that was the first big step. And then I would say the second big step for me is exactly what you're describing. I started to see my life as its own like fantasy adventure. And to this day, like my greatest pursuit and my greatest joy is finding out what this human, Willem, is capable of like being. And therefore like every day is awesome. For the past, like maybe not every day. I'm still human. We're all still human. One of my favorite like little sayings. It comes with the belly button. Like, we're still humans. Uh, but like, for instance, I have actually, we're making jokes about the gym a bunch today. Been lifting much more earnestly than ever before in my life. And part of the reason for that is because I've unlocked making it really fun. I don't know exactly what switch flipped, but yeah, I have like a little journal where I'm writing down the exercises I'm doing, and I'm recording
Nice.
weights, and I'm pushing towards various like goals. Yeah. And now the gym is this like awesome video game that I'm so excited to go and do every day.
That's why I
Yeah.
like CrossFit. You have all of these crazy abilities that you don't know how to do. And when you join, okay, I'm terrible at everything, but a little bit every day you learn something and you feel like you are in a video game. Okay, I learned this. This is so cool. I increased this load. This is so cool. Yeah, I think it is the easiest way to get this analogy across, but I think you can apply this to anything you want to achieve, like this kind of idea of evolution and learning skills.
Yeah, and I think so. We're going to jump in community questions here in just a moment.
Sure.
So if anybody has questions for Yuri, feel free to drop them in the chat. And by the way, before I say anything else, I just need to call out SoKiss's amazing joke. How does a buff writer get their work published? They bench press.
Great.
Anyway, thank you, SoKiss, for that. What was I even going to say? I don't know. Games are awesome. Pursuing oh yes, all right. Here's my last little point, and then we're going to jump to those community questions. Something else that I feel like has really unlocked me that is along the same lines that you're talking about, is that I have started to become the person that little Willem, like 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 15-year-old Willem, always dreamed of like becoming and didn't quite think was possible. And like that pursuit, like, let me be the most epic version of what Willem ever imagined we could be, is inherently so joyful and so much fun.
Totally.
So whatever the hell, yeah, I imagine most of you probably don't want to be a Maiar, a wizard of the first age, but find what that is for you. Maybe you want to be a mystery detective. I don't know. You're more into sci-fi. Who cares? Whatever it is, like, what is the real world version of that you can get little you excited about every day?
Nice.
Anyway, turned into a life coaching session. All right. So we've got Rick up on stage for the first community question. Rick, you've got a few questions asked. I leave it to you. Your choice. What would you like to ask?
Sure, I'll go chronologically here. So you were talking early on about the process of taking a gameplay or a story moment that was written and turning it into gameplay. Like, there's an extra level of process into thinking about it as a gameplay experience. Can you give an example of a narrative moment that was written for a story arc, and how do you convert it into an actual gameplay moment?
It's really hard to say something that I personally did. So I think it's probably better to. I can give you an example. I'll probably give you 2 examples so probably illustrate what I'm trying to say. One is, I don't know if you guys have played Legacy of Kain Soul River. Is one of my favorite games of all time. It's about a vampire. So everything in the game is based on story first, which is not very common because usually you start with gameplay. But because Amy Hennig is a writer first, which is the director of the game, she came up with the story and then thought about the game mechanics. So everything that affects the vampire have everything to do with the mechanics. Okay, so you can, for some reason, they come up with, they can, how can I say that, glide in the game. You're a vampire with wings, but your wings doesn't work. And the mechanics for flying were not possible. They could not make the character fly, but they could make it glide. So they come up with the explanation why. And in the end, it is just the beginning of the game, so it's not really a spoiler. The character is launched into a water pit. The wings are torn apart before, so they do not have wings anymore. So it's very easy. There's this whole concept of story stack, which I really recommend you guys learning. I think Jesse Shell has those explained in his book, but he also has those explained in one of his talks, which is like, what is the most flexible thing in a game and what is the less flexible thing in the game. And The fantasy is the thing that you want to sell to the player. For example, in Spider-Man, you are selling the fantasy of being the Spider-Man. That is very rigid. And you come up with the mechanics or the actions or verbs, whatever you want to call, the things that make Spider-Man Spider-Man. Okay, climbing walls, jumping, web shooting, all this stuff. The next things don't really matter. What I want to say is the most flexible thing for this example is the story. And probably people will say, wow, how is the story flexible? It is flexible because you can make those small adjustments and make things make sense. So for example, if for some reason you cannot make Spider-Man climb walls because of engineering restrictions or whatever problem you have, you can come up with an explanation, reasonable explanation, to make people accept that, okay, Peter lost his powers. He cannot climb walls, but he can still shoot web slings because those are technological things. So suddenly, just by writing something, you fix the whole story. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question, but yeah, it's trying to give meaning to restrictions or ideas you have for your gameplay in general and the fantasy you're trying to sell.
That definitely sounds like the concept of incorporating the restrictions and tailoring your story to make that make sense. I think that's a really good skill. I was asking more towards like, how do you think about your stories and what you're trying to tell, and how do you convert it into mechanics that you explain to other team members to say like this is the most effective way to tell the story?
Yeah, like I said, it's really hard to do that because most games don't start like that way, like from narrative perspective. I know Naughty Dog does that a lot. So what I would say is focus on the character and the things that make the character, because those will be translated probably as actions and gameplay mechanics. Like most games goes down to okay, this is the character. What are the things they can do? What is the fantasy I'm selling? So then you can come up with mechanics for the character. So I would probably anchor those things on the character if I was trying to do something similar.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. All right, Rick, I'm going to keep you up here. We'll have you do another question in just a second. Before then, we've got Art Muse on stage. Art, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, thank you so much, Yuri. I've learned a lot already.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm curious, how would you suggest growing or transitioning from a game writer position to a narrative designer position?
Okay, nice. One of the things I would like to say is you probably have other skills besides writing. We all have like other skills. And one of the things that will make you a unique narrative designer is all of the other stuff. Like there are people who are architects but want to be narrative designers. And suddenly you have like a very specific way to view the world as a lens of architecture. So if you have one of those experiences, they can help you. But what I would say is, first thing is probably read some books about game design. They will help you understand how things are done. There are some, I wouldn't say there are rules because game dev is wild. Nobody has like a rule for this. Everything can be flexible, but they have like they give you a general sense on how to do stuff. But the best way to become a narrative designer is to design things. And you don't really need to build a game. It can be on paper. Like come up with, like I said, you have a really cool character that you love. Just write down the character, all of these traits, all of these things, and start thinking. I really recommend you to look at the story stack. It will help you to do this that I'm recommending. But you can start, okay, my character is this thing. So the fantasy I'm trying to sell to the player is this thing. What are the natural actions that this thing could do that could be translated into game mechanics? And then you see that the game will emerge from the idea. So you can do, like I said, from paper, but I would also recommend for you to learn about Twine, Inky, Bitsy, whatever you feel like is the most comfortable for you. Twine is pretty simple. It's probably the easiest one to get in because it will teach you narrative, branching narratives, tell interactive fiction. You can always start as just writing text that is interactive and share with others. It's probably the best thing you can do.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Does that answer your question, Art?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I'll throw in on that since I work with so many people who are practicing in so many different disciplines, and narrative is one of the bigger ones. Remember that the primary difference as an art form that we deliver as game developers is player autonomy and player choice. So really, the difference between being a narrative designer versus like a writer outside of games or some sort of similar narrative role outside of games is exactly that: is that the player might make a choice and that affects your narrative. They might, fight the bad guy or befriend the bad guy. Who knows? So that I think is one of the more important skills to practice that differentiates a narrative design role versus anything else outside of this industry. And there's a couple of great ways to practice that. Number one, definitely just making some sweet twine projects or working on narrative heavy games. But the other thing that I'd recommend, this is so easy, is to DM some role playing campaigns. I know that can be intimidating to some people because there's a lot of rules and stuff, but it doesn't have to be D&D. There's so many other role-playing systems out there, and many of them are way more flexible. But that really is, like, hands down, one of the best ways to practice handling a bunch of weird players making weird choices and still telling a cohesive, interesting story. So if you're trying to get into narrative design, DM some campaigns, y'all. Do it online. All right.
Yeah.
We have Rick still on stage. Rick, you want to ask a second question?
Yeah, sure. All right. So when you are working as a narrative person on a team, the key word here is that you're on a team. Game development is a team sport. So you're going to be working with people who are engineers and artists and designers, and they're not narratively focused. So you are the one who's managing the narrative. And to give a worst case scenario extreme, I think we've all been in the scenario where you have that one writer who makes a 40-page Google Doc and sends the link to your engineer and says, "Can't wait to see it in the game. See you later." What can you do to develop your skills to collaborate with those people who are not narratively focused to leave your work in the most usable format possible for the other disciplines?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. That's a hard question because I felt in that trap in one of the projects of writing a lot and just sharing. And guys, that's what I did. Figure it out, and that doesn't work. So it is good to have like a wiki or some sorts of all of the ideas you have and share with the team, because it becomes like a knowledge database for everyone when you have to search something. Oh, what is this thing again? What is this character again? You have this base of knowledge, but the answer is not sexy for this. The answer is communication. Most of the time you're going to be in contact with people, having meetings and writing down stuff. You're probably going to be very, very close to the game designer. You want to be working very close to the game designer, because when something changes, you want to be the first person to understand that the thing changed, because you need to adjust the story. And all of the ideas you have for the story need to be written somehow in a place where the programmers will see, where the artists will see. And I would say having those really close to the game design documents would help. So I would say you can have like a GDD, like one pager GDD or something, but for narrative that really summarizes stuff. But most of the time it's just having communication, writing stuff, and trying to be present at all times. At least is my experience, which is not very long. It's very short.
Cool. Thanks.
I can definitely throw it on that because I just learned of a new tool that I've started using and I love it. Yeah. So number one, GDDs are essential for sure. And I've been swayed. 9, if you ever hear this episode, thank you. I used to write GDDs out in big docs, and now I use wikis, and wikis are awesome. Everybody do wiki GDDs. So yes.
Yeah, we use Obsidian.
They're so good. So I agree with you, Yuri, that those are essential, because if I am, let's say, a combat designer and I need to know what's going on with this boss, going to the wiki and finding the entry on that boss is super helpful and important. Definitely. But having any kind of expectation that anybody, a single person on your team, will read that whole wiki is a fool's errand. Yeah, they will not. So I think there's two things. Number one is, this is true, very true for anybody in the entire game design umbrella. This is not just for narrative designers. A huge part of your job is just enforcing the designs. And always remain flexible with that enforcement. So, your design might just be wrong, or there might be a better interpretation of it. Or like sometimes it's good just to concede if somebody else has an idea, because like we're all working on this together. So yeah, you gotta make sure you're actually enforcing it. You are checking in on other people's works. You're playing that combat and realizing that there was a misinterpretation of how the boss should be or whatever the hell, because nobody is going to do that except you. And then the second one, this is just the direct tool, is one that I learned from a guy named Quinn Elmer. He was just on the podcast an episode or two ago. So you guys can look back at the episode with Quinn. And he has a concept that he calls beat cards, which are basically little identifiable beat markers, like a story beat moment, that tell you what happens. And it's like a paragraph of text, and they're visually colored and things like that to show what this thing is. So there's like a beat card that's combat, and then a little paragraph that says the player should learn that, the bad guy betrayed him in this combat. And then there's another beat card after that that's like traversal. The player walks across this part of the map and notices a dead body. And then there's another beat card after that that's like conversation. The player talks to their mentor and finds out this information. And those beat cards I have started using in my day job, and I find them so useful because they're so visual and so simple. So anybody can go, oh, okay, these are the 5 important beats and the most important information that gets displayed in them. And then if I want to go learn more information about my mentor so that I really know what's going on, then I can go check out the wiki. So that was a long way for me to say, make sure you're enforcing it yourself because nobody else will. And then, beat cards are my new favorite narrative tool. So check them out.
Could I throw in?
If you go ahead, Rick. I was just going to ask about an example of this.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in really quick about from a programmer's perspective, things that I find is very effective when working with the narrative person is design documents that are meant to communicate with an engineer. This is the kind of mechanic that I want, and this is how it's going to work. And then I can turn that into a mechanic. I understand it as a programmer. And then when it comes to weaving the narrative experience, if you can just say, here is a mechanic that I had you develop. This is what goes in the empty fields of that mechanic, and this is where it goes in the game. You are responsible for weaving like all of the story moments and the cadence that they appear, and I don't have to understand any of that. I just bring it in and drop it in the game. Like that's something that I find is very effective for me when I'm collaborating with narrative people.
Mm-hmm. Exacting specs. If you're a designer, don't just write, it should do this, right? And here is exactly how that works. And probably work with your engineer to figure that out. All right. Yuri, you wanted to respond to that maybe?
I just gonna add that now that you shared like what is like the card system, it looks like a lot as an outlining, but with flowcharts, which is really interesting. And if you are like writing the story, that's one thing you can do too. Like you can write the story, the whole concept of the story of the game in Twine or some sort of tool similar, and then you can export like the cards as a flowchart or visual thing that will help everyone to understand what is happening. So yeah, that might be a tool to help communicate these things too.
Love that. Awesome. Apologize for the dog in the background. I am home for the holidays. All right, I think we've got time for one last question. I am going to read this one. Jury asks, how does one, coming from software engineering, start learning and practicing narrative design? I don't really read many books. Do you think someone like me stands a chance?
I think you stand a chance in the sense that you have like a unique perspective by being a software engineer. Like you have a lot of knowledge that most narrative designers don't have. There's even a specific role in the industry that doesn't have a name yet, that is like a narrative engineer, narrative programmer, narrative tool programmer. There's a lot of names related to that, which means you are talking to the narrative guys and trying to implement the systems they need in the game to tell the narrative. You can dabble on those before trying to get into narrative design properly if you want. But the thing is, to be a good writer and tell good stories, you need to read books, you need to watch movies, you need to watch everything, like consume everything that you can, because everything will be part of a repertoire for use. Like it will come in your like writing in the end. Even if you don't know, like all of those will become influences to you and it will get you in a better place as a writer. So yeah, I would say try to first get the things that you are good at, which is programming, I suppose, and figure out how to integrate them with narrative design. One interesting thing just to finish is those tools like Twine, Inky, they have like ways to be really heavy on programming and do really interesting ways that most people will not be able to work with, because they might be very complex. So yeah, I would recommend exploring those tools, because you can do a lot of interesting stuff with programming on those platforms by yourself.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think my favorite part of what you just said is was towards the beginning of that. You, as an engineer coming into narrative, will have a unique perspective that others don't have. Still to this day, one of my favorite quotes from this podcast is when we talk to George the Fat Man Sanger, who's kind of like a legendary old hat in the video game audio space. And he finished his episode by saying, "Find the U-shaped hole in the universe." This is true in any of the fields, any of the disciplines in game dev. Your prior experiences uniquely color your creative output, and leaning into that is almost always only a good thing. Obviously, you need to be able to contribute work that other people will care about, and that is understandable to your players and your team members. But it's good, for instance, Yuri, maybe to come into narrative with a programmer's mindset. Like, imagine how that changes the way that you tell stories. You probably are a little bit more sort of rigid and structured, and that's a good thing for specific types of stories. I encourage anybody that question, do you think somebody like me has a chance? I encourage anybody to answer that question with yes. As always, the person who thinks they can often can. So go for it, y'all. You can do it. All right, we're at the end of the episode. Yuri, as always, before we say goodbye, we like to do two things here, and that is, number one, to assign some homework. So what is a homework assignment that the audience can do in the next week? It'll take them about an hour to practice some of what we talked about here today.
Nice. What I would suggest is, what is the thing that you are trying to accomplish, and figure out what is the path that would lead you there. There is this very good website called Roadmap SH. It is for programmers. It gives you a lot of ways, like really visual track to get into a specific programming niche, let's say front end. It has all of the steps. I would recommend you do something similar, like for your career. Try to figure out, like, really design a path, like draw all of the milestones you want to achieve in your life. Okay, I want to be really good at this, really good at this. So eventually I will be so good that people can't ignore me as something. Whatever it is, just design a paper and then be ready to do the reps. 100, 1000, whatever, but do the reps.
Awesome. Yeah. There's a YouTuber that I watch who does glass blowing, and like I love this about YouTube. Like, I don't care about glass blowing mostly, but I still think that this person in particular is like really cool and fun to watch. And one of the things that she does is she has a tech tree that she designed herself about glass blowing, about learning to glass blow. Yeah, and it's just on like a poster board. Like, it's not like some sophisticated something. She just like looked up some skills she had to learn, and then a couple of reps for how she would get there. And then she drew out like, okay, I got to make 10 like, glass shot glasses, and that'll get me a little closer to this skill or whatever. And I always thought that was adorable. So yeah. Make a little bit of a plan, perhaps a tech tree for yourself. Look up a couple of those skills. And if you're curious about what those skills are, as always, just go to the job descriptions. What are the roles that you really want to do? Go look at those job descriptions and look up what they are asking for, and then practice those things.
Totally.
And yeah, make yourself 100%. Make yourself a little bit of a plan. Post that on LinkedIn for us. You can tag Yuri Flagrare as well as myself, Willem Delventhal, in the Indie Game Academy. And we'll check it out, and we'll wish you well and tell you that you're awesome. And if that's a little bit too much for you, you can always post it here in the Discord for support and love. Before we say goodbye, Yuri, is there any last words of wisdom you'd like to give, or anything you'd like to plug here at the end of the episode?
Yeah, I would just say that game industry right now doesn't look good. Everyone knows it, but doesn't really prevent you from trying to know how to make games. Like, just find the fun on doing games. Like, if that's something you really like, you're probably going to find a lot of places or things on aspects on game design and game dev that you really like. So don't let that disencourage you. I know it is hard. The dream is alive. Everyone wants to get in, but yeah, just focus on the journey. Probably you get there at some point if you get really good at something that you really love. And I don't know, I just want to plug in probably my own LinkedIn. Just follow me there. just search for Flagrare and you'll find me. There is no other person on earth, I think, that has this name. So
We'll link it down below as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. What a great final message. We mentioned Brandon Sanderson early, so actually I'll finish. Yes, the Star Wars shirt. Fantastic. A little bit of Baby Yoda. I'll throw in one final message from the wise mind of Brandon Sanderson. There's a beautiful quote. I literally cried the first time it was used. I think it's in the third book, maybe, of the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. And it is, the most important step a person can take is always the next step. We've got this, people. I don't know what we're going to do when the game industry turns around and we are no longer always talking about how it's kind of a shitty time in games. It'll be weird. So for now, keep at it. Do your reps, build yourself that plan, perhaps a literal tech tree, post it on LinkedIn for us.
Yeah,
and
tech tree.
Don't get discouraged. Yeah, you got this. Awesome. Yuri, thank you so much for being here. This has been a fantastic episode.
Thanks.
You finished out our year for us.
Sorry?
You finished out the year for us. This is the last episode of 2024.
Crazy. I never expected doing that.
Yes. Well, thank you for being here in that place
thanks.
of honor. As I mentioned earlier on, this is indeed the last episode of 2024. So we'll see you again in 2 weeks. There will be 2 weeks of no Indie Game Lunch Hour. I'm so sorry. You'll survive. Use that time to take a break, perhaps do a couple of reps, and we'll see you again in the new year. Thank you, Yuri, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for asking your questions, of course. And thank you for listening. As always, if you enjoyed, we ask that you send it along to just one other person who may enjoy too. All right, we'll see you again in 3 weeks, Wednesday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Goodbye, everybody.